It's Halloween, and so we're asking what makes games scary. I'm John Robertson, and I'm joined as ever by Stace Harmon. So, Stace, are you scared of games? Do you play horror games?
I don't play a tremendous amount of horror games, and probably for the reason that, yes, I think that I do. Honestly, I think I am actually probably quite easily scared by games. There's a couple of examples I can think of, and even games that I've previously played, one such example being Resident Evil 7 in VR. I played through the game normal on kind of, standard mode, and then played it in VR. Well, I played some of it in VR and decided...
Just couldn't take it. You're in there with your eyes closed.
Honestly, yeah. I was like, okay. It's particularly, it's the beginning of that game where you're unarmed, you go into the house, you get captured and you're sat around the table with the family. It was like, whatever it is that this is making me feel, which I guess is fear, obviously. I'm just not up for this. It was very much a solid sort of nope, I'm going to take the headset off. So I don't play a lot of horror games, but I am very interested in them. This is the kind of thing, like you and I have spoken about horror games. I'm more interested in hearing about the experience, and I probably do this with horror films as well. I'm interested in hearing about the experience and what happens, but I'm not particularly up for putting myself through that.
So other people will play them for you. And then
basically, I'm quite happy for, I'm that kind of person that like reads about the plot to something like Hereditary or something like that on Wikipedia. I'm that guy. Or we'll talk to friends about it who have seen certain films or had certain experiences with games. I'm not a huge horror games player at all. I think certainly you are more so than I am. And you've been playing a few horror games recently, right?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to play quite a few. I watch a lot of horror films as well. It's interesting you say Hereditary, because I, even though I play a lot of them, watch a lot of them, I'm also pretty easily scared by them. And I think I've gotten more scared of them as I've gotten older as well. I know a lot of people think it's the other way around, but for me it isn't. I don't think I was anywhere near as scared of them when I was younger. Do you think, just to inject on that, do you think there's an element there of like the coming to terms with your own mortality? This gets really deep really quickly, this episode. Coming to terms with your own mortality, that as you get older, you do start to realise more that you're not invincible. You're not going to live forever. Not that you ever really explicitly think that when you're young, but there's that subconscious feeling that you're invincible, you're going to live forever. And as you get older, you come to terms with the fact, even again subconsciously, that you're not going to live forever. Is that in any? Do you think there's like an evolutionary thing there that you start to feel like actually fear for your own mortality? Yeah, maybe. I don't. Yeah, maybe. The evolutionary side of things as to why we're scared of, why we have a scared reaction to things, I think definitely plays a part. It taps into that kind of evolutionary response of having to, being beneficial for our survival to be scared of certain things and to want to run away from them or hide from them or whatever. And I do like horror for that reason, because it does tap into, it's a safe way of tapping into a part of your humanity, a part of what makes you human, in a way that isn't going to kill you.
Hopefully it might be so scary that you have
it might be
complications. So
I do like that part of it. My own mortality thing, maybe. There's a lot of
hard. I guess it's hard to know, right? Because you're probably not actively aware of that, so it's a difficult thing to tap into, because you haven't necessarily thought about that previously or intellectualized it in that way.
Yeah, and I think this kind of depends on what kind of horror is being, because I think, yes, things that deal with like your own mortality or things that are much closer to you as a human, or your experiences that make you human, or the things that make you, those are the kind of things that are in horror that scare me a lot now. So, Hereditary is a good example, because it's not just about like defeating this giant monster that's really powerful and is going to tear you apart or whatever. It's about something much more core to your person, to your existence and the society in which you live in. So that's much more scary, for example, than say, are you scared of spiders or being in a plane crash or, you know, being shot or something, or whatever common fears are that people have. Like things like losing a loved one, you know, being lost somewhere with no idea about where civilization is, like being hated by everyone instead of being loved, you know, losing your kid or losing your parents, or, you know, that sort of thing. That's like those are the things that kind of scare me. Those sort of horror experience scores, things that tap into those sort of ideas, scare me a lot. Things like, to use movies like Evil Dead or Cabin in the Woods or that kind of thing, or with games like Resident Evil, they don't really scare me very much because I think they're more power fantasies actually. More than horror experiences. So things like Resident Evil, I don't know, this might be controversial, but I don't know if that's even a horror game to me. Like that has horrible things in it, but it's not really horror. Like it's not terrifying, it's not scary. It's all about overcoming things through your just sheer force. Yeah.
Well, you're also very well equipped to do that, and I think that's why very specifically the beginning of Resident Evil 7 worked for me in VR. I mean, even when I was playing it in normal mode, I felt uneasy creeping around that house right at the beginning. You've got no weapons. I think you might have a torch. And it was just this kind of unease. But playing that in VR, that same situation, despite having been through it previously, that same situation, there was a definite feeling of I was in that space. And of course, that's part of what VR is intended to do, is submerge you in that space and give you that 360-degree experience, and you've got headphones on as well, and it's very isolating and all-encompassing, to the point that if you're playing in VR like that and you've got headphones on and somebody taps you on the shoulder or something, it's like it can make you jump because you're so immersed in this other world effectively. So yeah, I think Resident Evil, I'd agree that in general I don't think particularly that they are horror games, and I don't know. I don't know. Are they even meant to be? That is a question. It's specifically the opening of 7 that kind of has that. I mean, it's kind of the antithesis of what Resident Evil usually is. You're not some. You're not some kind of. You're not a character that has special training. You don't have any weapons with you. You just go into this creepy house, and it's like I feel very vulnerable. So, but yeah, outside of that, I think the series as a whole is perhaps not. It can make you jump. It has made me jump in the past, but it's not like actively scary, like in the way that certain other titles are.
Well, I think it's important to. I mean, for our question, like what makes games scary, I think it is important to kind of look at maybe what isn't scary as well, even in games that people consider horror games. So it's not only that. I think the survival horror has come to mean like gory and a lot of blood and a lot of viscera and a lot of that sort of things, a lot of mutilated corpses and whatever. But it's other things as well. It's mechanical things. So it's the scarcity of resources. It's the lack of knowledge of the map. It's the low health threshold. The difficulty in finding items to progress, and that kind of tension of having to go back through the map that you don't know very well with even more limited resources because you've found this some gate that you need to open, but you don't have the key to unlock the gate or the gem or whatever it is. So that has come to mean horror for a lot of people, specifically survival horror. And it's like that does have like the tension and release cycle that horror goes through, like building up and release now that you're through and you see the cutscene and you're in a safe room and whatever. So it does. And the tension of release cycle is one of the key elements of horror. You need to have moments of tension and then to drop off the tension, because otherwise you just become desensitized to it and eventually it stops becoming scary. So Resident Evil does have that. But it doesn't have any like emotional core of fear, really. It's just blowing stuff up or shooting stuff or running away from stuff or you doing that to the enemies.
Yeah, and it also, I think it is somewhat infamously so hammy, Resident Evil in particular, and there's plenty of other games that fall into this category as well, that even the tension that it does manage to create, it can frequently and quite quite completely undermine that tension when people start opening their mouths and talking, because it's so amusing that it kind of sucks the what is it, like the authenticity of it, or the verisimilitude of like this situation. It's like, well, okay, now I remember that this is kind of just now my subconscious remembers that this is just a pantomime essentially.
Yeah, and that's fine, and I do like those games. Resident Evil 2 remake, especially, and last week's when I highlighted that as one of my favourite sort of games of the last few years. I do like those, but I wouldn't necessarily call them horror. They're not the kind of games that I go to bed thinking about. They're not the kind of games I have to turn the light on to have something resembling peace. Like, they don't stick with you. They don't make you ask questions of yourself. And I think that's a key bit in real horror, is that if something's truly terrifying to you, then it forces you to question why do you feel that? Why has that made you feel that way? Why has that impacted you like that? And Resident Evil doesn't do that. I think that actually there are very few games that do tap into that. Certainly compared to movies, there are fewer games that really try to be what I would call like outright horror games, rather than kind of power fantasies involving gore and blood and zombies and destruction and whatever. Video game mechanics historically lend themselves. There's been more research, more trial and error, more successes and failures on the guns and the ammo and the map and the low health and stuff than there has been in creating something truly scary. And I think most of that's actually happened away from the AAA space as well. It hasn't tended to be the AAA games that have kind of explored that space very much. Alien Isolation is obviously, a big exception to that. That does limit you on a lot of things, but it also does create a real sense of fear. Like, it nails that tension and release.
Do you think Alien Isolation works? Does it work in that game's favour that we are already, even if you're not as an individual familiar with the films, that we are as a society, as a culture, we are familiar with what Alien is and what it represents, and the specific xenomorphs and like it? Does it, because there's a similar kind of mechanic, again going back to Resident Evil, in those games with this stalking presence, this often invincible or nigh invincible presence that's stalking you through this map. But Alien Isolation does seem to nail that all the more. Although I would say, you touched on it earlier with this notion of like desensitizing or desensitization, that does happen. I remember playing Alien Isolation and being very like creeping around and elevated heart rate and that worked for the first few times of getting caught by the alien, but then after that I guess it can't help but, if it's relying on you to be fearful of this particular outcome happening, and then this outcome happens again and again and again because maybe you hit a particularly difficult part of the game and you just see effectively the game over screen and the numerous ways to die multiple times over, it seems like it can't help but have less of an effect as time goes on.
I mean, I agree with all of that. And so there's a couple of things there. So one, Alien Isolation is far too long. It's much too long. It can't have that same, because it uses the same core essence of hiding from the alien hunting you, you're not wanting to get caught. It uses that over and over and over again. It does add some different elements in there with the androids and stuff, but primarily it's the alien. And it's far too long, and it's too long because essentially you've undergone exposure therapy. Like, how do you not be scared of things? And how do you reduce your fear of things? Where you expose yourself to them and you learn that they're not scary and that you'll live to fight another day. And that's what happens in Alien Isolation. You either expose yourself to the alien by succeeding and hiding from it, and you live to fight another day, or you die and then reload, so you live to fight another day. So by the time you're at the end, you've been exposed to it way too many times for it to continue to be scary, at least scary in the same way as it was. It might still be scary because you don't want to lose progress because now you're at this bit that you haven't saved for a while and it was really difficult and whatever it was, and then you don't want to lose progress and go back and do that again. But I wouldn't call that fear. I wouldn't say that's genuine fear. That's just you just don't want to lose progress. That's it's an irritation rather than a fear.
So then that sounds like there's potentially or what seems like a counterintuitive element to that if you were able to play through Alien Isolation specifically in this case, and maybe never get caught, if you were so incredibly good at it or you were so incredibly patient and you took your time to the point that you were never caught by the xenomorph, I wonder if it would then remain scarier, at least, that because you would always have that fear of this thing happening and you would never become desensitized. You still become desensitized to perhaps the process and I understand now that the alien behaves in this way. And I understand that these things are effective. I understand that the alien's field of vision is X, and that you start to slot in more of the variables and use them to your advantage. But if you are never or very rarely caught by the alien, I wonder if you would stay in a that it would retain its power, the finality of the outcome, even if it is just for a few seconds of a game over screen, would retain some more of its power than it does in just constantly dying. So,
yeah, I think probably that's right. And again, this comes back to my belief that the game's far too long, because the longer the game is, the less chance you have of achieving that. Yeah, genuinely, I think that game really outstays its welcome. While it's a great achievement and it is scary for a good portion of it, there are at least 2 points where the game narratively could have ended and it would have been totally fine, absolutely 100% fine. But it just goes on and on and on, and it still remains fun, but it loses that scare factor. It just becomes just like another sort of survival game at that point. It's not but I mean, games that are shorter, so of this generation, so PT is an obvious touching point for a shorter game / demo, whatever you want to call it.
That's another one that I didn't finish. I still have that installed on my PS4, and
so you had 10 minutes long.
I've played it a couple of times. Well, isn't there like a whole load of secret stuff that you can find? Is it entirely linear? I mean, I've had it installed for literally years, and yet I still don't really know.
Yeah, I mean, I've only played through it a couple of times because I'm too scared to get it out again.
I'm like, I just don't like this feeling of it's too weird. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah,
and
so
I'm not.
I mean, and to that, so that brings me up. So PT and Phasmophobia, much more recent game, still in early access, I think they're scary for the same reason, and they both absolutely terrify me, and they do that just like twist on reality really, really well, just like something weird or unsettling in the environment. It's not like a weird hellscape world. It's not, there's not stuff overtly trying to kill you every second, but there is weird stuff going on, and it might just be, the corridors are a little bit too narrow, or that shadow isn't matching the light source properly, or the light's flickering for some weird, or the phone rings, or whatever, that door's open and it wasn't open before, but I didn't hear anything. Little things like that just twist your expectation of things that we're infinitely familiar with, that we've seen loads of times. Like the idea in PT that you're going through this kind of never-ending corridor, and you open a door and then you're back at the start of the corridor that you've just left. Like it's been done in many things, but I think that still remains an incredibly powerful sort of tool to unsettle you. Like, imagine that in real life.
Well, there is like a whole subgenre of horror, isn't there, particularly in film, that is about that, this notion of inescapable fate, or not even fate, but just a situation that is inescapable. And I think that's probably what the Saw films, I imagine,
Final Destination.
Yeah. No, I have seen a couple of those films. I find them more, not amusing, interesting. I like the ingenious ways they come up with.
They're fun, yeah.
For killing these people. And it's, the false starts on, it's going to be now, and then it isn't, and then it's some other just ludicrous way of dying.
It's that tension and release thing again.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I wonder if is there something in that of like, it's this...
Well, it's like a corruption of things that we take for granted, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
Like turning on the light, walking in, expecting that this door leads into this room, therefore the one on the other side leads out of it, but actually no, it leads back into it again from the same position. It's like, well, how does that work?
I think also PT and again that very beginning of Resident Evil 7, that they tap into the same sort of thing for me. Quite a very straightforward, simple thing, which is lacking the means of defending myself or my character defending their self. And that's where, the Resident Evil games certainly, and lots of other horror games as well, it does drop off. As soon as you have a weapon, it's far less... and it's also like there's a thing of the unknown. I'm not being able to defend myself. In Resident Evil 7, you get attacked and your hand gets cut off with a chainsaw. As soon as that happened, it was like that was the release for me. Like there was this complete undermining of the tension was gone. That's I think for me, that's the thing that I... and perhaps one of the things I'm most scared by. In PT, I felt like that was just the tension was constant, or for as long as I played it, because as I say, I didn't finish it, so it was constant for as long as I exposed myself to it. And I was like, I just don't. There needs to be something. There needs to be something needs to make me jump or something, because I need to have that release. And so it's probably quite a straightforward thing for me in terms of that. It's like, well, I'm lacking the means of fighting back or having any sort of control, perhaps, is more of a fundamental element of that.
Yeah, well, I definitely think the idea of being helpless in the face of whatever it is and you can't fight back. But I think, again, that goes more to ideas like the corridor that constantly loops, more than... not having the right gun to beat this enemy, otherwise you would be able to beat it theoretically. Like, how do you defeat an ever looping corridor? Like, how do you defeat the idea of being lost in the middle of the desert with no training about how to find civilization? Like, how do you if I'm trying to think of other examples. Like if you experience time differently to everyone else, like how do you defeat that? Like how do you even go about, or like in Amnesia Rebirth, this is a minor spoiler, is you find out in the first hour, but your character is pregnant. So then how do you defeat the idea of, how do you overcome the fear that what's happening to you is one thing, but then what does that mean for the baby inside of you? How do you overcome that fear? Like, how do you beat those things? Like, they're not things you can beat with like a machete or a gun or a grenade. So it seems like, and then games kind of reflect real life in that way and kind of makes them scary, because there's no tool really that the game maker, the writer, the designer can give you that's going to overcome that fear. So it sticks with you after you've finished playing. And I think those are the things that make games or films or books or whatever really quite scary for me, because you implant yourself onto them an enormous degree, so they become personal. They're not objective experiences that are just washing over you. They're subjective things that you've had to have an engagement with in order to fully understand or to fully develop a response to it.
Yeah. So then how does something like Phasmophobia work where from an external perspective, it looks like the fact that you play in multiplayer, primarily you play multiplayer with up to 3 other people. It's like 4 of you exploring this place. So you're all chatting. You're all aware. You are all aware that you're playing a game. And because for me, from an external perspective, that's like sitting around watching a horror film and with other people and being able to chat about it. And exerting an element of control. And there's that kind of, sometimes there's that like nervous talking where it's just to take the tension out of this rather than be taken along by the music and the visuals on screen and kind of being manipulated in that way of like manipulating my emotions. If I want to, I can just start talking and that immediately drains some of the tension. So how does a game that basically seems like it's working against itself in that you're not on your own, you're not kind of locked into this situation where you can't do anything about it and you've got other people around you to help you, how does that manage to be so scary? Because I know that you've talked about this with that being one of your recent experiences of being a genuinely scary thing that that has affected you afterwards, that you've thought about afterwards that night.
Literally I'm in there with the room with the EMF reader in Phasmophobia, like one of the tools you can use to detect ghosts or spirits or whatever is an EMF reader. I'm in there just trying to listen to the correct beeping sound to get the right reading, and I'm not looking at the screen, like my eyes are like off to the side. I'm just waiting, just can't wait to turn around and run out that door. So Phasmophobia does so it's got the same so like PT, it does the unsettling very well. So it's a typical environment. It's a house, and not like a big giant haunted house, just stereotypical thing, but just like a house in a suburban street in America. And you know that there's a ghost there. You know that you're there to work out, like, paranormal activity has been detected there. So that's not in question as to whether there might be something there. You know something's there. You got to figure out what it is, like what kind of spirit it is. And there's unsettling things. The phone will ring, the lights will flicker, it'll be really cold, some dirty water will appear in the sink, a door will open, close, the power will go off, or like whatever. All kind of normal, kind of cliched stuff. But I think they do limit so you can't fight back against anything, really. You can do a couple of things to defend yourself or like to stop the ghost from attacking you and killing you, but you can't actually fight back. You can't kill the ghost, you can't hurt it, you can't destroy it in any way. So that's off the table. So immediately your expectations and the way that you're thinking about the game is quite different to Resident Evil or Evil Within or whatever. And I think it's scarcity. They use scarcity of resources in a different way. So you can only carry 3 things. You can carry 4 if you're in VR, bizarrely, but you can only carry 3 things if you're not playing in VR. I'm definitely never going to play in VR.
Doesn't sound like something I'll play anytime soon.
So, and one of those might be like a powerful torch. So then you've got 2 slots left for things that defend you against a ghost and or detect what kind of ghost it is, help you detect what kind of ghost it is. So you're very light on resources, and there's no way that you can carry enough to detect what the ghost is by yourself. So not only are you scarce in resources, so you feel quite naked in the game, but because you're relying on other people, I guess there's a bit of a fear there because it forces you to trust them a lot. So I guess it's a fear of being in a situation and your trust is wholly put on someone else. And are they going to do the right thing to help you and save you if you get attacked? Or are they just going to save themselves? And they might say that they are, but you never know, really. And because like it's kind of, that control is kind of a little bit out of your hands, I think it's that bit scarier. It's like anything, like you're kind of more scared when you're not, you're more scared in a car going really, really fast if someone else is driving it than you are if you're driving it or whatever. So I think it taps into that really effectively and really well. And the game is just like the unsettling aspect of it is really good and really clever. And you don't get, or I don't anyway, or the people I play it with haven't really gotten desensitized to it. So it's not like we're in there all just like laughing and having a great time and making jokes and stuff. There's a little bit of that, but normally it's like, okay, I'm going upstairs now. The door's closed. and I'm now turning on the EMF reader, and it just freaks you out because like even though you're not seeing anything, it's like, oh my god, like someone else's tension is now being like pushed onto you. You feel it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it kind of is this kind of collective, you know, the layers up on top of each other makes it more powerful rather than diffusing it.
And you mentioned that, you know, there's a few kind of staples or cliches that it employs, but that seems to be, that's the thing with these kinds of experiences, that the cliched is a cliche for a reason. It's a cliche because it's used over and over again, but it's used over and over again because it's effective and because it works. And so it being cliche doesn't make it any less effective. It doesn't make it, you don't, even though you are perhaps intellectually rolling your eyes at it and going, oh, okay, this again, that still doesn't, for me anyway, that still doesn't, that doesn't ward off the feeling. I can think one thing, I can know, you know, in the same way that, of course, that you can watch any sort of horror film, play a horror game, and know that it's not real and understand that intellectually, but your primal responses and the emotional responses you have to it, it's kind of like, well, that's not really a defense. That doesn't actually help me. It doesn't for me to know that this isn't real isn't enough for my
it's like we've become
those responses. That's the problem.
Yeah. It's almost like we've been conditioned either through our evolution or through nurturing by seeing them again and again. But we've been conditioned to respond to some way in these cliches, responds to these cliches in some way, but that doesn't mean that we've lost the response to be scared by them. It's quite interesting. And again, very few games manage to do it, but the ones that really do it really well. And I think interactivity has a big part to play here. And we're going to wrap up soon, but I think it's just one more point. So interactivity has a big part to play here because you're actually the one forcing the action. You're the one having to push forwards into the scary thing, the scary monster, the scary place, the scary looping corridor, whatever, the scary piece of music. Rather than have it kind of presented to you in like a book or a film. That sort of, you know, the engagement, you're the one having to make the leap here. That can make a good horror game, that can kind of take it to the next level. That next level of engagement, that next level of response. And I've been thinking, I wonder if there's actually a limit to how scary a game can be before people just decide I'm not playing it anymore. I don't want to engage in this because you are. Do you mean again,
as an individual or en masse? Like it is.
I think en masse. I think I think as an individual, but also en masse. And then if enough individuals say, I'm simply not playing it. I mean, the game will still probably do quite well in sales because if loads of people say I'm not playing that game, it's too scary, I couldn't finish it, then it's going to make people buy it.
Becomes notorious.
So but then will people actually finish it? And I wonder if there is a limit to how scary you can make things. Because you are having to ask the player, okay, go into this now and engage with it, be the one that forces the action, be the one that triggers the horror, triggers the fear, triggers all this stuff. I wonder if there is a limit to how scary a game can be if your hope is to actually have people finish it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess that's a difficult thing because there'll always be... Well, now at least, from sort of this point on, there'll always be people that are willing to put themselves through that, not just for their own entertainment, but in the world of streaming and people making a living out of having other people witness them playing a game. I guess there's always people that are going to expose themselves to these things for that purpose, not just like it's work, it's a job, it's a thing that, you know, I know that plays into it, whereas perhaps 20 years ago that wouldn't have done. It's that I can choose to experience this thing by myself, for myself, or I can choose to experience it. I mean, it's not something I would play on my own at night with all the lights off, but if I know that I can do that and X number of people are going to watch me do that, and potentially even as a side benefit to that, I'm going to earn some money out of it, then maybe, you know, maybe that's just, there's always going to be people that are willing to then put themselves through that particular ringer. I mean, I'm certainly not one of them, but
it's interesting with things like streamers and stuff because there's a lot of like, reaction videos, reacting to this, reacting to that. And I wonder if that actually is kind of teaching games developers that the way you get your game to be successful is by adding more and more jump scares and stuff, because that's what streamers react to and that's what people like watching. So I wonder if more jump scare based games are going to become more prevalent in the future. Although saying that, Phasmophobia is very popular with streamers. I mean, it's streamers that have kind of made that game popular, really. And that does have jump scares in it, but the real impact of that game isn't on the jump scares. And I don't think that the jump scares are not by design either. They're kind of just things that you see sometimes, but they're not like, and now we will manipulate the player to see this jump scare. It makes
you jump, but you don't. It's not being necessarily presented to you in a way that, because I guess you can't always determine what people are going to experience, right? Like it's going to be different for each person, and they'll get that because it's not as authored as a horror film or a more linear experience. So yeah.
Okay, well, that's what makes games scary then. But it's basically everything for me.
Lack of control, I think, is a big thing for me. Yeah, lack of control. I think that would be my number one take. Probably a lack of control, lack of feeling like I'm in control, I can defend myself, etc. That would be my big thing about what makes games scary for me. Okay, well, that was why games are scary. I'm currently playing Amnesia Rebirth. I think I'm like halfway through it. Are you playing anything that's horror or horror related? Recently I started playing Other Side, which isn't really horror per se. It's kind of an XCOM / Banner Saga style turn-based team squad turn-based kind of combat game, puzzle game, that kind of like using the right tool for the job. But there are horror elements in that, and one of the biggest of the horror elements in that for me is that some of it is based on the developers' real experiences with having lived through certain experiences with like a blood disease and what that did to them and how they felt, and then trying to imbue some of that into the game. And there's other games that do that too. I think Darkwood is one that's tried to recreate that feeling of that kind of recreate that idea of that feeling that the developers had at some point in their lives. And so, there's that. I'm not playing out like an outright horror game, but there's certain games I'm playing that have horror elements to them for sure. Yeah. All right, great. Well, happy Halloween, everyone, and we'll see you again next week. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook at Indie by Design, and across any of those places you'll also find a link to our Discord. So come join us there, and thanks for listening.